This time on Insight, Sam interviews Dr Verena Dietrich-Bischoff, a lecturer in the School of Biology. We discuss the challenges of fieldwork with animals, how she remembers her students, and her surprising taste in music.
You're listening to Insight, the University of St Andrews Student Physics Society's podcast. I'm your host, Samuel Avery. Join us as we journey into the lives of St Andrews academics, discovering their passions, inspirations, and motivations.
So today on Insight, we're interviewing Dr Verena Dietrich-Bischoff from the School of Biology. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Firstly, I'd just like to thank everyone who sent in questions from the School of Biology. We're very glad to have those, and you'll see some of them crop up. So, Verena, what are your positions here at St Andrews?
So I'm a teaching fellow in the School of Biology, so I'm education focused. I do mostly teaching and marking, of course, mainly in second year at the moment, but also my colleagues and I, we do curriculum development, so we regularly review our curriculum and see that we're sort of up to speed with the latest developments, and sometimes we make changes. So for example, last year we completely restructured our second year, and I had a leading role in that, and then also teaching administration is quite a big part of the job. I've got some service roles as well, so I'm a pre-honours advisor of studies, for example, and I'm second year coordinator in biology. I sit on a few committees, so I have to attend meetings, unfortunately not too often. And at the start of this semester I took over as exams officer in biology from my colleague and very good friend Bill Heitler, and that's quite a big role, so I'm coming to terms with that at the moment.
So quite a lot going on then. And what path led you to your position here at St Andrews then?
So I'm German, so I did my undergrad and my PhD in Germany, and I would have stayed in Germany, I think, if it hadn't been for my husband. So he's a biologist as well, and in contrast to me, he decided that he wanted to stay in research, and everybody told him at the time that in order to be competitive you have to go abroad for a postdoc, and well, basically we didn't want a long distance relationship, and so we decided to come to the UK together. I also thought that it might offer a bit more flexibility for me in terms of job options, and that was indeed the case. So we went to Cambridge first, and through a chance encounter I got into teaching there. So I started to lecture a sabbatical cover at Anglia Ruskin University in Cambridge, but then mostly I did these supervisions, these small group tutorials organised by the colleges in Cambridge, so for Cambridge University. And so I got quite a lot of teaching experience when I was there. I also did science writing for a couple of years. I wrote for a website on convergent evolution, and I had done a bit of freelance writing stuff before writing and also translating for two German bird journals to stay in touch with my original field of research. And I was enjoying all that, but then my husband got the job offer from St Andrews, and around the time we were moving, basically when I was really busy packing boxes, a friend told me that she had seen a job advert for this teaching fellow position here in biology, and I read it and I thought, gosh, that's my job. And so I applied and I got it, and I know that we've been extremely fortunate to both get positions in the same place. So that's how I got here, and I started just about 4 years ago.
So Germany and here and a lot in between.
Yeah, well, Germany, Cambridge, and then here, yeah.
So you are a zoologist, yes?
Yes, so I would consider myself a zoologist at heart. So my PhD was in the field of behavioural ecology, so that's sort of a crossover between behaviour, ecology and evolution. So it looks at how the behaviour of an animal affects its survival and reproduction, and how that's influenced by its environment. So that's what I worked on for my research.
So I was going to ask, could you explain in 1 minute evolution and why we have the emergence of so many different species? It's a big topic, so
1 minute.
I'll count you in.
Okay.
In 3, 2, 1, evolution. Go.
Okay, so I have to start with Darwin and his evolutionary theory, of course. So he realised that when individuals over-reproduce and resources are limited, which is almost always the case, then they will start competing for these limited resources, and some individuals will basically be better adapted to the current environmental conditions than others, and so they will be more successful at surviving and reproducing. And if the traits that make them more successful have a genetic basis, then they will be inherited by the offspring, and then the successful traits basically will accumulate in the population, and it will become adapted to its local environment. So that's basically what Darwin referred to as the survival of the fittest. And then when you think of Earth, there's such a huge diversity in environments, so on a very large scale, but also on a small scale, and environmental conditions of course change over time as well, and so populations will become adapted. It's of course not quite as easy as that.
Time.
You need some kind of isolation mechanism. Okay.
So quite a comprehensive reply for 1 minute, but there's a lot to cover there. Okay,
Couldn't
thank
quite
you.
finish, but hopefully it was okay.
So I'm going to ask some questions about your earlier fieldwork, and you did your PhD and Masters. They were fieldwork based, yeah?
Yep.
So what was one of the best things about being able to do fieldwork with animals?
Well, I really enjoyed being outside, and obviously you get to really know the animals. You learn a lot about them. You can also handle them, which I really enjoyed because I worked on coatits. I basically did paternity tests on them, so I had to capture them, the parents and the offspring in each brood, and then I had to take blood samples, and we also took a number of measurements like body mass and parameters of body size and all that, and the chicks were just unbearably cute, and I have to say I am a sucker for cute animals and so I really enjoyed handling them. And yeah, just being outside working closely with colleagues for fieldwork is very good for team building basically, and I had some very nice animal encounters apart from the ones with my birds, and also it's very hands-on work, so at the end of the day you know exactly what you've achieved, and that's quite satisfying. So
there's quite a lot going on there.
Lots of things to enjoy.
And also cute animals. Who isn't a sucker for cute animals? So what were some of the challenges that you faced, though, working with animals?
Well, they're animals, so they do what they want. They're completely unpredictable. They might not cooperate. So, for example, I've mentioned that I had to capture the adults. I mean, the chicks I just had to pluck from the nest box, but the adults had to be captured. And so we used wire traps. So we studied a nest box population, which is rather convenient. And all the nest boxes were actually at a height that I could reach, which was good. And so you can take off the front, and we had these wire traps that we inserted from the inside, and there was basically a thread that was taut, and when the adult bird came in to feed the chicks, then it would touch the thread and the trap would fall shut basically, and we could just go and take it out. But they learned, so in the population I studied, they usually breed twice a year because conditions are very good, and so during the second brood the animals would no longer go into the nest box when they could see a tiny bit of a trap or when they had seen use of being around, and so we had to think of something else, and so we resorted to a sort of rather more archaic way of capturing them. So we had to hide as close to the nest box as possible, and then watch the bird, and then as soon as it went into the nest box and it looked like it would stay in there for a bit, then we would run and try to get there in time, place the hoe with our hands, and then sort of get the bird out. And that was actually another aspect that I really enjoyed that I forgot to mention earlier, because it's ancient hunting instincts kicking in. I mean, I would never harm an animal, but no, it was really exciting. It was a proper adrenaline rush, and I do miss that, I have to say. Yeah, but they make things a bit more difficult for us. And then, of course, you're in the field. And, I mean, I was lucky I did all my field work in Germany, so there are not particularly challenging conditions there. But we did have days when the weather was bad and we couldn't really do much. And we had a lot to do in quite a short period of time. There's also a very limited time window when you can do the research that we had to do. So that made life sometimes a bit difficult. So, I mean, I worked in a managed forest, and it was quite big, and so we had to use cars to drive around, and I would get stuck on occasion. And also there were quite a lot of ticks around, which
dear.
are basically the only animals I really don't like, and some parasites as well. But people who work in
Well, that
different
makes
locations.
sense. They are the opposite end of the spectrum from the cute animals. But that sounds quite exciting, though, the thrill of the chase. And you told us that you actually got a fieldwork scar. Could you tell us a bit about that? Was it while capturing a bird?
Well, yeah, so that sounds probably a bit more exciting than it actually is. It was just, I was hiding, and it was a problem bird. So you would have some problem birds that we'd try to capture a number of times, and they just would always evade us. And so it was really important that I got this one. And it was quite a long distance that I had to run, and there was a huge bush before the nest box, and I was just hit really hard by a branch when I was approaching, and it scratched my skin. But yeah, it's nothing more exciting.
A very glamorous
than
job then, yeah. So did you ever compete with your colleagues about like who caught the most birds or the most exotic species that you spotted?
Well, we didn't have an official competition going on with respect to who caught the most birds, I think, but I like to think a bit more patient than my colleagues, so they tended to strike earlier than me, and so there were quite a few birds they scared away, and they then gave them to me, and I would sometimes spend 1.5 or 2 hours sitting there, and I would always have my binoculars because my eyesight's rubbish, and imagine sitting crouched somewhere. I mean, even I had to crouch sort of in a bush with maybe branches poking you sort of left, right and centre, and holding binoculars steady for like over an hour. So that was quite challenging. But
the patience paid off.
I usually got the difficult ones.
Of course. So what's the species that you're most proud of seeing? Or find most fascinating?
You know
Big
what,
question.
I find all animals inherently fascinating, and I couldn't say that I'm particularly proud of having seen particular animals. Also, unfortunately, I haven't really been to many exotic locations yet. There are lots of places I'd like to travel to, but I haven't made it yet. But yeah, every animal encounter is great, and I enjoy seeing a species that's sort of common, basically as much as I enjoy seeing one that's rare. Actually, some of the nicest animal encounters I had in my parents' back garden, because I could get really close and watch for a very long time hedgehogs, shrews, mice, newts, etc. And also being here is great because I've never lived on the coast before, and so there was a whole new sort of fauna to explore, and so I love a lot of the seabirds here, and obviously seals and dolphins. And
sounds quite lovely then.
One of the animal encounters that I still remember vividly was actually in the only properly exotic location that I've been to. That was Tobago in the Caribbean, and we were on a very small island called Little Tobago, so we went there by boat, and it was famous for its colony of red-billed tropic birds. So they're extremely beautiful birds, bright white with long tails and obviously a red beak. And so all my friends, they were standing on the edge of the cliff and trying to capture good pictures with their massive lenses, and I was relaxing in the shade for a bit, and so I was sitting next to the path, and then at the other end of the path, so about 30 centimetres so away from me, I saw this tropic bird, and it must have been a female sitting on her nest, and she didn't move, and she was so close, and so I'd never been that close to a wild animal before, so that sort of stuck with me.
Magical, but it's also about taking enjoyment from the animals that you're at. That's lovely. Do you ever wish that you could spend time living the life of the species that you're studying?
Actually, I've thought of this, and
I mean, I imagine you must have watching them all day. But
no, if you sort of ask me what would I like to be able to do that's impossible, I would actually say sort of live a day or so in the life of an animal, obviously not being eaten during that day, and also sort of at the same time kind of retaining my humanness, so I can evaluate what's going on and actually understand how they see their world. I mean, they're animals. I mean, I'm entirely fascinated by them sort of in their own right, but there are so many that can do things that we as humans can't do, and we have absolutely no idea what it feels like to be able to do this. So things like echolocation or magnetoreception or electroreception, this kind of thing, and I would really like to know what it feels like to do this kind of thing.
That does sound very fun. Were you an avid bird watcher before you started doing orphanology research?
So I've always enjoyed being outside. My dad's a biologist as well, and so from a very early age I wanted to do nothing but biology. But I'm a bit of a sort of jack of all trades, I guess. So I've got a reasonable sort of species knowledge across the board, I'd like to think, but I never really specialised in birds in particular. I mean, I like them and I enjoy looking at them, and I could identify as the common ones. And I'm still not, unfortunately, a really great birder. I mean, I'm okay with the common species, but for example, I'm rubbish with birdsong, and I don't know why, because I'm really into music, but for some reason it just doesn't stick. So there are lots of my colleagues who are much better bird watchers or bird identifiers than I am, but I generally enjoy being outside and looking at whatever animal I come across. So,
does entering research enhance the experience of watching animals, or does it detract from it a bit because you feel you need to spend time studying them?
Oh, no, it certainly doesn't detract from it. I would say it adds sort of another dimension to it. But I can certainly still enjoy animals as much as I did before, and probably even more because I know more about them now. So,
excellent. It only adds. Excellent. So we're going to move on to some teaching questions now. So what kind of functions do you fulfill as the examinations officer in your school?
So
you're a new job.
Actually, it's quite a big job. So it's by no way limited to the actual exam period. So people might not be aware, but we already start in week 1 of the semester. So that's when we ask module organisers to submit exam questions, and then basically we format the exam papers, and we do an initial check for sort of grammar, spelling, clarity, appropriateness of the questions, etc. But then we've got a very thorough internal and external scrutiny process that needs time. So the first drafts of the papers are sent out to colleagues in the School of Biology, and they carefully look at them, or that's what we hope at least, and then they make comments, they might suggest changes, and so these have to be addressed, and then when we're happy with the draft papers, they send out to external examiners. So these are academics at other universities who work in relevant fields, and so they have some time to scrutinise the papers, and so they always come back with comments and suggestions for changes as well. So then we have to get back to the question setters to incorporate those, and at some point the papers will be ready, and we submit them to registry. So the deadline for this is actually already mid-November, so things take time, and we then communicate with registry also regarding our exam requirements and all that, and we then have to check the printed papers, so lots of checking involved to make sure that there aren't any mistakes, or at least no major mistakes in the papers.
There's an awful lot going on there. Yeah.
Then it obviously gets
checks,
really...
double checks and triple checks from this end of things.
It gets really busy during the exam period. So we've got the papers coming in, and we've got to check them. And in most of our modules, the questions are set by different members of staff. So we have to sort the papers, take them apart, send the questions to the correct setters. They mark them, send them back. We then enter the marks, we check. And sometimes there might be second marking. And then once everything's come back, we put the papers back together, we check again. There are also some statistical analyses regarding grade distributions and things. And at some point we're happy with everything, and then the external examiners come in and they scrutinise the exam scripts and sort of generally what's been going on in the modules. And then we have the module boards where the externals meet with module organisers and discuss and ask questions. And at that stage, grades can still be adjusted. And once that's all done and we're happy with the grades, we have to report them after checking again, of course. And for our graduating students, we have to check the degree classification and all that, and basically when first semester is over, then second semester starts again, and once second semester is over, we've got the research diet in August coming up, so it's quite a big job. And of course I don't do it all by myself. We're a team of people, but I've got responsibility now, which is a tiny bit scary, so any mistakes are mine basically, and I also have to do all the official communication with the university now. So
really an awful lot going on. Wow. So when do you think is the worst time to have an exam? In the morning or the afternoon? I feel this will settle it once and for all.
I'm not a morning person, so I would prefer to have my exams in the afternoon, but then you can't really pick and choose. So I think all my exams were in the morning, and I just had to cope with it.
I weep for you, yeah. Afternoon exams all the way. So this was a question submitted by someone. So they were asking, how do you remember all your students so well? Because I've been told that you have a uncanny knowledge of all your students. Do you think that your bird cataloguing skills helped?
No, certainly not. But I did think that this question might come up, and I'm just really lucky because I've got naturally good memory for names and faces, so it does come easy to me. I don't really practice or anything, and I do get quite a lot of exposure to our students. But I also think it's nice for them if we know who they are, because everybody always talks about how St Andrews is so small and everything's really personal, and so I think it is nice to know whom you're dealing with.
It is a bit of a unique thing here, yes. So what's a tip that you wish you knew when you started lecturing?
You know what, I find this question actually quite difficult to answer, because lecturing is a very individual thing and everybody has their own style of lecturing. So I think it's more important to sort of gain your own personal experience and to practice. And also, obviously, I had attended lots of lectures as a student myself. And when I had to write my first lectures for the sabbatical cover in Cambridge, I had the luxury of being able to spend a very, very long time on writing them, so I could really think them through and I could communicate with my colleague I was covering for. And so I can't really think of any particular tip. I mean, something that I've realised is that it doesn't always have to be 100%. That's maybe 90 or 95 or 97. Okay, I'm still learning, so... Yeah.
Okay.
But sorry, I can't come up with anything sort of more...
Maybe not an individual tip, but like a small book written by you, for you. Okay.
Yeah, maybe. I probably think of something at some point.
It'll come to you later. Why are your PowerPoints always yellow? And how long has this been your signature? This is another thing that someone else submitted. Don't know if you can tell.
Not really, it's not. It's sort of an orangey yellow, but yellow is my favourite colour. And I once heard that for certain students it's sort of easier to have sort of this kind of background. I like yellow, and I do spend far too much time designing my lectures. I do like sort of them to look nice, and ever since I started lecturing, that was my sort of signature background.
So it's your favourite colour, and science approves as well. So good reasons. And another thing that people recognise you for is your animal of the day. Could you tell us a bit about this idea and how you came up with it?
Yeah, it's kind of my trademark, and actually this is something that I was inspired to do here. So maybe that would be a tip. So somebody said you should maybe have something, or it would be a good idea to have something to break up your lecture a little bit, to give the students a breather. And I thought, what can I do? And then, because I am a great lover of animals, I thought, maybe an animal of the day. So in every lecture of mine, at some random point, more or less, an animal would crop up. So I show a picture and I tell the students a bit about it. So it could be an animal that's just really cool for something unusual that it can do, or sometimes I just go for cute animals. Or we could play with things like guess the chick or find the animal, looking at pictures of camouflaged animals and things. And also, I lecture really quite broadly. So I also lecture in physiology, for example, or cell biology. And I think it is a good thing to remind these students that these sort of systems or cells are actually part of a bigger organism that's interesting in its own right. So.
Yeah, it's a lovely idea, and it sounds like it's a fan favourite as well. So have you ever considered letting the students vote for the animal of the day? Or is it always you decide in the mornings, you go on the internet and troll Wikipedia? Yeah,
well, I decide. Yeah, I mean, also when I did my science writing, I came across a lot of interesting examples. So sometimes I would sort of go back to that. No, I haven't thought of that. Maybe I will.
And do the animals change year to year? Is it always unique, or is it the same lecture cycle repeats?
Yeah, it's probably the latter, because sometimes I think, maybe I can come up with something new, but then I usually forget, and so it tends to stay the same.
That's fair enough. And do you have a most interesting type of animal? You said you're a bit of a jack of all trades, so maybe not.
I do think all animals are inherently interesting. I could say coated because that's the animal I worked on. I could also say rodents because I've always been a great lover of rodents, and I think if humans were to disappear, then maybe rodents would take over. But you can approach this question from a lot of different angles. So you could also say animals are interesting because they have capacities that we do not have, or because they're able to survive in extreme environments. Or you could say animals are interesting because they have very good model systems to sort of answer to use to answer certain questions. Also, could say they're interesting because they are understudied and not very much is known about them, although there are usually reasons for this. Also, could say they're interesting because they are endemic to a particular region, or they're critically endangered, or they have a particularly important role in the ecosystem. So, yeah, lots of different sort of viewpoints, but I think all animals are interesting.
Well, I was going to ask if you had one that was most uninteresting, but maybe not then. Or maybe parasites, as you mentioned
really.
earlier.
Well, they're very interesting from a biological point of view. I just don't like them.
I mean, that's fair enough.
I spend
they're
so
not
much
the most loved of it.
time removing ticks from my clothes and crushing them, which is quite difficult to do. So they're the only animals I kill because they're nasty.
And nobody blames you.
Shouldn't have said that. I do feel bad about it though. Domestic animals I don't find all that interesting, and I guess sort of from a purely biological point of view, so excluding any aspects of psychology, humans I think would actually be my answer.
No, that's fair enough. What do you love and hate most about giving lectures?
Oh, gosh, I don't think there's anything I hate about giving lectures, I have to say, otherwise I would perhaps not do it. So I generally like lecturing. I mean, I've always been interested in communicating science more than actually doing it myself, I think. And at university, I always liked the things that most of my fellow students hated, so I did enjoy giving talks and things like this. And so I think it's just... Yeah, I enjoy communicating something that I think is interesting and relevant, and thinking about how to present it in sort of hopefully a clear and reasonably engaging way. I also usually try to make it a little bit interactive as well. So you
love kind of the different aspects of lecturing maybe then? You enjoy doing it all. And if you could carry out research, however, in another subject, what would it be?
So, I mean, I actively decided to stop doing research for a myriad of reasons, basically. So it's quite unlikely that I would do research in another area. So because biology has always been my passion. I mean, in terms of jobs, maybe I could do something like veterinary medicine or psychology, or maybe I'd be a photographer or do something with the languages. I mean, I've always had wide interests, but with respect to my job or sort of career, what I want to spend my life doing, it's always been biology, really.
Excellent. And what's something that you feel students should know about academics in biology?
Well, I'm not sure whether I can speak for sort of all my colleagues, but I guess at the end of the day we're all human as well, and I like to think that we're quite approachable, and I think we like it as students are interested in what we do, and I do hope that we're all passionate about what we do, whether it's mainly research or mainly teaching. So
Excellent.
I can't really think of anything else.
No, that's a good answer. So this was we're going to move on to more general questions, and this one was submitted by someone else. So do you think in English or in German?
Oh, it totally depends on the context. So in my job, I always think in English, and when I talk to my husband, who's also German, about my job, I would, well, maybe not entirely speak in English, but there would be the odd English phrase or word, and obviously when I talk to people back home or think about things that sort of don't have to do with my job, then it would be more in German. But I also dream in a mixture. So sometimes I dream in English, sometimes I dream in German. So.
That is interesting. That was a good question. Are you able to recognize any birdsong? I think you mentioned earlier, no?
I mean, the most common birdsong I know, but I'm not very confident, so I tend to doubt myself. And I always look for the bird and see if I can spot it. And when I was right, then I'm kind of proud of myself. But yeah, generally I'm rubbish at that, unfortunately.
So you'd much rather identify by sight rather than...
Yeah, but then my eyesight's rubbish too, so I never go out without my binoculars. But yeah, I have to work on my ID skills, I think. I mean, they're all right, but yeah, compared to what colleagues are able to do, yeah, certainly.
What's one thing that you miss about your student days?
Oh, one thing I miss lots. Sometimes I wish I was still a student, and I have to explain being a student in Germany is very different to being a student here. We've got no fees to speak of, and there's a lot less pressure, and so it was this a very carefree and really enjoyable time. Life hadn't really started to get serious yet, and it was all a big adventure. The work was your oyster, this kind of thing, and there wasn't that much responsibility, certainly not for others, and I miss that kind of feeling, I have to say, but then I guess life's all about moving on and all that. I mean, I really enjoyed learning, but that's something I continue to do. So I guess it would have to be the social aspect, because you met lots of people with similar interests and you spent a lot of time with them. So at university, so we always did practicals and groups, and it was really nice going on field trips with people, but also outside university. So, cooking with friends and playing board games, having movie nights, going clubbing, going to parties, this kind of stuff. I don't really get to do that very much anymore, so yeah, I do miss that.
Yeah, that sounds like a good time. So you mentioned that it's quite different being a student in Germany and the UK. What do you find to be the biggest difference between UK and German culture generally?
Oof. Well, I wouldn't say there's really huge differences, otherwise I might not be here. I'm not sure, but there are lots of small-ish differences. I mean, a lot of the stereotypes are true. So Germans are very efficient, maybe not that patient, and maybe not overly polite. And the Brits are very traditional, and they are very polite, which makes everyday life perhaps a bit more pleasant over here. But it can also be a bit tiring because people tend to not really say what they think, and I struggle a bit with that. And there are other things. I mean, I guess people's attitude towards national identity is very different, and that's of course to do with the history of the two countries, but I don't really want to go into that. But something that I sort of noticed from my own personal experience, housing and property, I find very different. So I was quite shocked, I have to say, when I came over to the UK to see how bad the housing standards are compared to Germany, and I'm still struggling with that. Also in terms of energy efficiency, and then people's attitude to property. In Germany, it's very common to rent places, and you've got a lot more rights as a tenant. And there are many people who rent for their entire life, so you really only buy when you know you can afford it, and when you're planning to stay in the place for a very long time. Whereas here, if people buy left, right, and centre, and they have no problem selling again. And I found that really difficult to sort of change my very German attitude to that. So we bought a house last year, but I found that really hard. So yeah, that's one thing that came to mind. My husband would probably have said food.
So it's kind of the attitudes of the people towards other people and towards property kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's something that you look forward to when you go travelling, either back to Germany or elsewhere on a holiday?
Oh, gosh. I mean, when I go back to Germany, which unfortunately does take up most of my holiday time, then I look forward to seeing family and friends the most, because I do miss them awfully. Also, just being, when you grow up in a country, you can't just shake it off. So just the feeling of really belonging and being home, and everything's familiar, and so the small things, listening to the radio station you've been listening to when you were a kid, and going to the supermarket and seeing all the foods that you love, this kind of stuff. Yeah, just this feeling of belonging, really. And so we haven't done that much. So when we had just come to the UK, we thought, oh, we do holidays here because, you know, we'd be here for a limited period of time, and so we explored the UK, which is very nice. Now that we've come to Scotland, and it looks like we'll be around for a while, we've sort of started to do holidays back home in Germany, so sort of no particularly exotic destinations. But I mean, generally with travelling, obviously seeing, experiencing different places, and also the fauna there. So we go on sort of nature holidays. I mean, I do like city trips as well, but if I had to choose, then I would always prefer to be outside and just go hiking and things. So.
Oh, I agree. That's much better.
And food. I do enjoy trying new food. So
it's always a good time.
Yeah.
What is your favourite thing about St Andrews, however, now that you're here?
There are lots of great things about St Andrews, but I probably have to say its location. I mean, where do you get a top-class university and as nice a spot as this? So certainly nowhere in Germany, so that's great.
Excellent. So you've mentioned this before. You said that you didn't actually have a smartphone. Are you trying to avoid getting one, or is it just happenstance? Or
No, I'm afraid I'm quite technophobic. I mean, I do appreciate, I rely on technology to a huge extent in my job, and I couldn't do it in the way I'm doing it without it. So I do appreciate that I need it and that it has advantages, but I don't really want it to invade every aspect of my life. I hate this idea of being sort of constantly available, contactable, being able to look for information on the web sort of to distract yourself. I don't like that, so I've resisted a smartphone up to now. It might be time to get one eventually, but yeah, I still haven't got one. So
do you also try and avoid gadgets when you're outside then and out in the field?
Absolutely, yeah. I only take my binoculars, and that's not really a gadget, is it?
I wouldn't say that counts. So you've mentioned that you like to talk about this bit, so I'm going to bring it out the quick fire for a change. What is your favourite music genre and song?
How long do I have?
As long as you need.
Well, I certainly don't have one favourite song. So I like to emphasise that generally I've got quite a broad taste in music, and I do love classical music. But there are only 3 genres that I listen to the most. So I'm really into sort of indie alternative rock. I love Muse. I think Matt Bellamy's a genius. Arctic Monkeys, The Last Shadow Puppets, Franz Ferdinand, The Libertines, Strokes, All J, etc., etc. I'm also quite partial to Gothic Wave. So when we were in Germany, I used to go to Gothic Wave Festival every summer, and one of my favourite bands ever is sort of usually classified as Gothic Wave. They're German, so nobody would know them. They're called Deine Lakaien, and he's got one of the most gorgeous voices I've ever heard. Unfortunately, he's got quite a strong German accent as well. But what I listen to most, which tends to surprise people, I guess, that's metal. And so I listen to an awful lot of metal, and there are all these different sort of sub-styles within metal. And in recent years, I've come to really like melodic death metal. So
quite an eclectic taste then. Quite a lot going on there. And do you have a favourite song from your favourite band then that we could maybe play for a bit?
So I don't have a favourite song, I don't have a favourite band. Can I highlight a few songs?
Go for it, yeah.
So for a classic, really like Metallica's Wherever I May Roam, or I could have picked any song from the Black Album, really. Then one of my favourite metal bands, they're German, they're called Blind Guardian, and they're amazing musicians, and they've written recently some very complex, epic songs that have a lot of elements from classical music. One I'd like to highlight, it's 13 minutes long, it's called And Then There Was Silence. I generally don't like female voices too much, but in metal there are a few excellent female-fronted bands, and one of my favourite bands, who unfortunately split up quite some time ago, were After Forever from the Netherlands, and she's got an amazing voice. One of my favourite songs from them, although it's not really typical, it's called Attendance. Within melodic death metal, so I really like two bands, so I couldn't really pick between them. One is Dark Tranquillity. They're reasonably well known in the scene, and I actually met the singer in summer when I was at a festival, so I've got a picture of me with him, which I'm very excited about. So they're amazing. And then the other band I really like, which are not well known at all, they're Australian, and I'm so hoping that they will come over here one day so I can go and see them live. They're called Bellicor, and I think if you want to play a snippet of a song, then please play a song called Abeyance. It's got one of my most favourites of song openings. It's very powerful, but you have to play it until he starts to sing, quotation marks.
Okay, excellent.
I could go on, but you probably want to move on.
we might move on to the next question. So is photography a hobby that you've considered taking up during your fieldwork for the animals you're studying, or do
Actually, I've always enjoyed photography. I like to think that I've got quite a good eye for motive, but I've never been interested in the technical side of photography. So my dad's a really keen photographer, and we used to go out together and take pictures, and he always tried to interest me in the technical aspects, but I never really wanted to get into those. So I'm not a proper photographer, but I do enjoy taking pictures. Yeah,
I think that's the best way to do photography. Well, maybe some people will disagree. What other hobbies do you get up to in your free time then?
I enjoy loads of things, but there's nothing particularly exotic or spectacular. I mean, as I've said a few times, I really enjoy being outside and watching animals, going hiking. So the coastal path is great here, so I've done quite a bit of that. So I really enjoy reading. I mean, as you might have guessed by now, music's a big part of my life, so I listen to it a lot, and at least from time to time I try to really focus on it, so I wouldn't have it on as a distraction, but I would really only listen to it. I also sing in a choir. I love dancing, although unfortunately that's limited to sort of my own living room at the moment, more or less, because we don't really get out very much. That's very sad. Also, I like baking. I don't like cooking, but baking's great. And I like doing things with my hands, so things like gardening and DIY and sort of crafty stuff, but I don't really have much time to do that at the moment, unfortunately.
So a lot of practical hands-on things. And I agree, baking is much better than cooking. So we're going to move on to the quickfire round. So these are some questions that you can take less time to answer, but obviously feel free to expand upon your answers a bit if you wish. So first of all, what is your favourite non-academic book?
Oh gosh, again, I find it incredibly difficult to pick a favourite. I've got lots of authors, books I enjoy reading, and there are books that stuck with me for a long time after I'd read them. So, for example, One Day by David Nichols, Life After Life by Kate Atkinson, Special Topics in Calamity Physics, you might like that, by Marisha Pessel. But I want to highlight a book that I've read quite recently, and I've also met the author twice, and he seems a really, really nice guy. So that's called To Be Continued by James Robertson. He's a Scottish author, and I really like his writing style and sense of humour. It's also quite surreal, and it features what's currently probably my favourite literary character. That's a talking toad called Mungo Fourth Mungo. So what's not to like?
That does sound very good fun, actually. Do you have a favourite sci-fi movie animal?
So I do enjoy sci-fi movies. I wouldn't say I'm a real buff, but I can't really think of any animals as such that feature prominently. So I guess things like the Ewoks or Chewie from Star Wars, they wouldn't really count as animals, would they? So I mean, I'm a Trekkie. Well, not a proper Trekkie, so a bit of a Trekkie. And I don't really like sort of the very old Enterprise thing, but I did watch a little bit of that, and there were these tribbles, I think they're called, these sort of fluffy balls that reproduce a lot. So I quite like those, and also I really like Douglas Adams. And I like the idea of the Babel fish in Hitchhiker's Guide, but I've never seen the movie, so I don't know sort of what they actually made it look like. So.
Oh, I don't think the movie was particularly good.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I didn't watch it.
Did you ever consider making a sci-fi animal the animal of the day?
Well, based on my very limited knowledge of sci-fi animals, probably not. So I might look into that if I have time.
Would you rather be on a plane between two arguing passengers or next to a screaming infant?
Oh, goodness me.
You need to choose. Someone submitted this
excellent
question.
Equally bad, I think. Probably in between the argument, because that might be interesting.
You could listen in at the very least. What's your favourite flavour of ice cream?
Oh, gosh, again, I can't pick a single favourite flavour. I like Janettas, except for the Qs. And they do all these sort of exotic things, and I can't remember anything now, but I do like stuff like orange and mascarpone, or elderflower something, or... Oh, I don't know. I like caramelised walnuts, so any ice cream that has those in is basically a winner with me. But I do like chocolate and vanilla and sort of classic stuff as well. So I don't think there's... I don't like these sort of overly sweet and very artificial tasting things. Like my husband loves iron brew sorbet. I hate it. And so, yeah.
Okay, so most ice creams are good ice creams.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who is your favourite scientific communicator? Is it going to be Attenborough?
Yeah, I have to say Sir David. Yeah, I think he's amazing. And I was fortunate I met him once in Cambridge. I mean, it was at a book signing, so I didn't really meet him properly, but I got a chance to see him up close and talk to him for about a minute. And I did tell him that I think he's done so much more for the natural world than, well, many of the scientists taken together can ever dream of doing, I think. So, yeah, I admire him hugely.
Excellent.
And I'd quite like to be him, but...
Great choice. How do you like your tea?
My tea?
Yeah.
Black. I like black tea, and then with milk, quite a lot of milk, actually, and a little bit of sugar.
Classic.
And I've recently become a biscuit dunker. I thought I would hate it, but then I saw a programme and I thought, well, maybe I should try it again. That's something I tend to do when I don't like something. I would try it again periodically to see if my taste has changed, which it does. Sometimes.
It's a great British art, dunking the right way and making sure the biscuit doesn't fall off.
It's only rich tea biscuits that I like dunking. I don't see the point of dunking chocolate biscuits or something. So.
Excellent. So you've mentioned that you have a lot of animals that you love, but do you have a favourite flower or plant?
Oof. No, again, I can't really pick one particular favourite. Everything that smells nice, really. So I really love the smell of lime trees, and I like trees in general. I'm a bit of a tree hugger. And things like roses, lily of the valley, violets, mahonia, lots of things. I also, because yellow is my favourite colour, and they are so abundant around here, I really like daffodils.
So maybe daffodils in the short list at the very least.
They don't smell. So, yeah.
Okay, so the finishing question, and you can take a bit more time for this one. Is there anything to be learned by humans from the animals we study?
Oh, yes, there certainly is. Because humans are incredibly stupid in that we're the only animals that destroy the environment that we live in and rely on and need for our survival, and that's of course something that animals don't do. So there are natural regulatory mechanisms in place that mean animals sort of don't exploit their environment to an extent that it's no longer inhabitable. And this is something that's just not working with us. And so think we certainly should look at animals for that.
So it's really finding the balance with the environment that we're in. Excellent. I think that's a great place to end. So thank you very much, Dr. Verena Dietrich-Bischoff from biology.
Oh, I really enjoyed that, so thank you.
You've been listening to Insight, the University of St Andrews Student Physics Society's podcast. I was your host, Samuel Lavery. Thanks to all the wonderful academics of St Andrews. Join us in the future as we learn more of the people making our education. This podcast was produced by myself and our publicity officer, Connor McBride. To find out more about the Physics Society and what we do, please find us on Facebook or Google St Andrews Physics Society for our website. Goodbye!